What if I told you that the reason you believe eating carrots improves your eyesight is because of a lie told by the British government to fool the Nazis? What if I told you that some of the most iconic images of World War II weren't just art, but weapons? Weapons more powerful than tanks, more devastating than bombs, and more far-reaching than any military campaign? Today, we're diving into the hidden war of World War II, a war fought not with bullets, but with posters, films, and carefully crafted lies. A war where governments discovered they could literally reshape reality in the minds of millions. And by the end of this video, you'll never look at wartime media the same way again. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor burns. America enters World War II. But within hours of the attack, another war began. One most people never knew was happening. Government officials, artists, and filmmakers were recruited not to fight on battlefields, but to fight for something even more crucial: the hearts and minds of the American people. You see, World War II wasn't just fought with guns, tanks, and bombs. According to official government documents, persuading the American public became a wartime industry, almost as important as the manufacturing of bullets and planes. This is the story of how governments learned to weaponize human psychology, and how those weapons are still affecting us today. Before America even entered the war, President Franklin D. Roosevelt faced a massive problem. The American public was war-weary from World War I and largely isolationist. Polls showed that over 80% of Americans wanted to stay out of European conflicts. But Roosevelt knew America would eventually have to fight. So began one of the most sophisticated propaganda campaigns in human history. But this wasn't your typical government messaging. This was psychological warfare on American citizens. January 6, 1941, the Four Freedoms speech. Roosevelt delivered what would become the blueprint for American war propaganda: the Four Freedoms speech: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, everywhere in the world. But here's what's fascinating. The government initially rejected artist Norman Rockwell's offer to create paintings based on these freedoms. They thought his vision was too ordinary, too American. But when the Saturday Evening Post published Rockwell's Four Freedoms paintings, something incredible happened. The public went absolutely wild. These paintings became the centerpiece of the largest war bond drive in American history, raising over $132 million. That's nearly $2 billion on today's money. The government had learned a crucial lesson. Abstract concepts needed to be made personal, relatable, and emotional. December 1941, 1942. Full mobilization. After Pearl Harbor, the gloves came off. The government launched what they called an aggressive propaganda campaign with clearly articulated goals and strategies. They recruited the nation's foremost intellectuals, artists, and filmmakers. This wasn't amateur hour. This was professional psychological manipulation. The Masculine Strength Campaign. One of the first major campaigns focused on what they called masculine strength. Look at these posters. Powerful men, mighty machines, bulging muscles. The message was clear. American men were strong, capable, and ready to channel that strength into war. But here's the psychological trick they were using. These weren't just recruitment posters. They were identity reinforcement. By showing idealized versions of American masculinity, they made men feel like not joining the war effort meant you weren't truly a man, brilliant and terrifying. The carrot conspiracy, but perhaps the most ingenious propaganda campaign, wasn't even American. It was British, and it created a myth that millions of people still believe today. The British had developed top-secret airborne radar technology that let their pilots detect German bombers at night, but they couldn't let the Germans know about this technology. So what did they do? They started a massive propaganda campaign claiming that British pilots could see so well at night because they ate carrots. They published posters, radio ads, even pamphlet recipes, all claiming carrots improved night vision. The campaign was so successful that it spread to America and created a myth that persists to this day. Your parents probably told you to eat carrots for better eyesight. That's Nazi-era propaganda still working 80 years later. 1942 through 1943, it's a woman's war too. As the war intensified, America faced a crisis. Massive labor shortages. Millions of men were overseas fighting, but the factories needed to keep running. The solution? Convince women to enter the workforce in unprecedented numbers. But here's what's fascinating about the propaganda targeting women. It had to walk an incredibly fine line. Government documents reveal they were worried about challenging traditional gender roles too much. One official memo stated, "These jobs will have to be glorified as a patriotic war service if American women are to be persuaded to take them and stick to them." So they created campaigns that portrayed working women as glamorous, attractive, and feminine. The message was, you can be a patriotic worker and still be a desirable woman. Look at these posters. Notice how the women are always perfectly made up, stylishly dressed, confident but not threatening. The campaign worked almost too well. By 1945, the number of working women had increased by over 50%. But here's the dark side. As soon as the war ended, a new propaganda campaign began encouraging women to return to domestic roles to make room for returning veterans. The same techniques used to get them into factories were used to get them back into kitchens. One of the most complex propaganda challenges the government faced was racial unity. America was fighting against Nazi racial ideology while maintaining its own system of segregation and discrimination. African-American newspapers launched what they called the WW campaign, Victory Over Fascism Abroad and Victory Over Racism at Home. The government was terrified this would undermine the war effort, so they launched their own counter-propaganda. Posters and films highlighting African-American participation in the war effort, but carefully avoiding any challenge to segregation itself. One government official wrote, "There is religious and racial prejudice everywhere in the land, and if there is a greater obstacle anywhere to the attainment of the teamwork we must have, no one knows what it is." The result? Propaganda that promoted unity while maintaining division. A masterclass in having your cake and eating it too. Meanwhile, on the home front, Americans were being asked to sacrifice. Gasoline, rubber, sugar, butter, meat, all rationed. But the government knew that asking people to sacrifice without explanation would breed resentment. So they created elaborate propaganda campaigns explaining that shortages existed because materials were going to the troops. Every sacrifice became a patriotic act. Use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without wasn't just a slogan. It was a psychological reframe that turned deprivation into virtue. 1943 to 1944, psychological warfare. As the war dragged on and casualties mounted, the government faced a new challenge: war weariness. Americans were getting tired, and tired people don't buy war bonds or work extra shifts. The solution? Fear. Government public relations specialists had discovered something chilling. The most effective war posters were the ones that appealed to the emotions. And the most powerful emotion? Terror. Look at these posters. This is Nazi brutality, showing Nazi soldiers threatening American families. He's watching you, suggesting enemy spies were everywhere. These weren't just warnings. They were psychological manipulation designed to keep Americans afraid and compliant. One government manual stated, "Commercial advertising usually takes the positive note in normal times." But these are not normal times. This is not even a normal war. It's hell's ideal of human catastrophe, so menace and fear motives are a definite part of publicity programs. Think about that for a moment. The government was officially acknowledging that they were using fear as a weapon against their own citizens. Perhaps the most insidious fear campaign was about spies and careless talk. Posters warned that loose lips sink ships and the enemy is listening. Americans were encouraged to spy on their neighbors, report suspicious behavior, and assume that anyone could be a Nazi agent. The psychological effect was profound. Americans became suspicious of each other, self-censoring their conversations, and constantly looking over their shoulders. The government had successfully created a surveillance state powered not by technology, but by paranoia. 1944 to 1945, maintaining morale. As the war entered its final phase, the government faced perhaps its greatest propaganda challenge: preventing complacency. Americans were confident of victory But that confidence threatened to undermine the war effort. The solution was a series of campaigns designed to remind Americans of the ongoing sacrifice. Posters showed wounded soldiers with messages like, "The meaning of sacrifice," and "Stamp 'em out," referring to both enemy forces and complacent attitudes. Government documents reveal the strategy. The mortal realities of war must be impressed vividly on every citizen. There is a lighter side to the war picture, particularly among Americans, who are irrepressibly cheerful and optimistic. But war means death. It means suffering and sorrow. These final propaganda campaigns were perhaps the most sophisticated. They had to maintain support for the war while preparing Americans for the massive casualties expected from invading Japan. They had to keep people working in factories while celebrating impending victory. They had to maintain unity while acknowledging the enormous cost of war. The campaigns worked. Americans maintained their support for the war effort right until the very end. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, it wasn't just a military victory, it was a propaganda victory. So what's the legacy of World War II propaganda? Well, you're living in it. The techniques developed during the war, emotional manipulation, fear-based messaging, identity reinforcement, psychological targeting, these didn't disappear when the war ended. They evolved. Every political campaign, every advertising strategy, every social media algorithm uses techniques pioneered by World War II propagandists. The carrot myth is just the tip of the iceberg. How many of your beliefs about health, politics, or society can be traced back to propaganda campaigns you've never heard of? World War II propaganda proves something terrifying and powerful. Reality is malleable. With the right techniques, governments and organizations can literally reshape what people believe to be true. They can make sacrifice feel like privilege, fear feel like patriotism, and lies feel like truth. The next time you see a political ad, a news story, or even a social media post, ask yourself, what am I being convinced to believe? What emotions are being triggered? What reality is being constructed for me? Because the war for hearts and minds never ended. It just got more sophisticated. And now you know how it works. If this opened your eyes to the hidden history of propaganda, make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories from history that you've never heard before.